Cruza los mares, cambia el destino. Pule tu instinto, conquista el mundo. Imaginación.
Ik moet dit gauw naar de eigenaar brengen. Hij zal heel blij zijn. Goed gedaan. Neem deze haring.
Do you think what the sailor is eating while complaining about its bitter taste is a simple onion? In reality, it is a bulb of the legendary Semper Augustus tulip. It was the personification of madness, a single root that could be traded for a warship or a luxury mansion on the canal. This poor man ended up in prison, accused not of a simple theft, but of a crime that shook the foundations of capital. He cries injustice. How is it possible that he must pay the price of a warship just for eating an onion? How did we reach this extreme? Let's explore what is commonly known as Tulip Mania in the Netherlands. This event was not just a simple anecdote of high prices. It was the first time in history that the desire of capital completely crushed the real value of things. We are looking at the prototype of the financial bubbles and speculative systems we see today. Back then, thanks to the massive success of the Dutch East India Company, VOC, Amsterdam became the epicenter of global wealth. There was such an excess of cash that capital could find no outlet, and all that liquidity ended up flowing into a new and unexpected market: tulips. Another key factor was the nature of the bulb itself. Since they were buried underground, contracts began to be traded for bulbs that had not yet bloomed, activating a leverage system similar to today's futures markets. This caused the scale of speculation to grow uncontrollably. In this environment, as rumors spread that even maids and chimney sweeps had become millionaires overnight through speculation, the feeling of FOMO, the fear of missing out, took over all of Amsterdam. At that time, people called these types of speculative transactions wind trade, the most expensive tulip of all, the Semper Augustus. In reality, this splendid flame pattern was, paradoxically, a mutation caused by a virus. This biological scarcity, which could not be artificially created or its blooming accelerated, became the ideal pretext for speculators to drive prices up indefinitely. As in all speculation, when prices reach the extreme and a moment comes when no more buyers appear, the trend is usually a fall as violent as its rise. However, in the case of the Amsterdam tulips, this did not simply end in a loss due to devaluation. As I mentioned, by operating similarly to futures before blooming, the full value was not exchanged. Custom dictated that the buyer only pay for the cost of the drinks of the tavern where the deal was closed, about 3 florins on average. This meant they operated with a guarantee margin of less than 1%, or even 0.1% for the most expensive bulbs. That is why, when the bubble burst, the lines of claimants in front of the city hall were endless. Finally, in late 1637, the Amsterdam authorities made a decision. Since it was a trade of wind without real substance, they proposed that contracts be annulled by paying only between 3.5% and 10% of the agreed value. But even this was not enough for many. As these were private contracts, many remained trapped in a swamp of debt for life. The most tragic example is that of the genius Jan van Goyen. At the same level as Rembrandt in his time, he ended up with debts amounting to billions of today's won because of the tulips. His countless landscapes were not just the fruit of his passion, but the desperate record of a man who could not set down his brush until his death in an attempt to pay off his debts.
The tulip crisis, which swept the Netherlands into a speculative frenzy, was fueled in part by the previous resounding success of investments in the Dutch East India Company, VOC, which had already captured the world's attention. Now, how about we do a little quiz about this famous company we've heard so much about? Of the following 6 options, which one do you think is incorrect?
It's not as easy as it seems, is it? East India companies existed in both the Netherlands and Great Britain. Although the Netherlands dominated the scene first, the British company was actually founded 2 years earlier. The initial goal of both companies covered the entire region they called the East Indies, including Indochina and the Malay Peninsula. Their primary targets were cloves and nutmeg, spices that, at the time, were only found in the Maluku Islands of Indonesia. Both had state authorization to maintain their own armies and the right to sign treaties with foreign nations independently. In essence, the East India Company was a state-authorized band of pirates under the guise of a private enterprise. Looting and sinking merchant ships from other countries was part of their daily routine. It was an era when business was synonymous with war. At the forefront of all this was the Dutch VOC, the world's first joint stock company. Want an example of how relentless they were? The initial capital raised by the VOC was 6.42 million florins. However, just 1 year after its founding, they captured the Portuguese vessel Santa Catarina. The ship was packed with Chinese silk and porcelain, items that European aristocrats were obsessed with. Do you know how much they got from auctioning this loot? No less than 3 million florins. With the capture of a single ship, they recovered almost half of their entire share capital overnight. Following rumors of this great success, investors flocked in, driving the VOC's market capitalization up to 78 million florins. Converted to today's values, this is equivalent to about $7.9 trillion, a figure representing 2.6 times the value of Apple. It was the moment the most valuable company in human history was born. Finally, after forcibly displacing Portugal, the Netherlands took complete control of the Golden Route that stretched from the Cape of Good Hope to Dejima in Japan. Originally, Japan maintained a very close link with Portugal through silver. As explained in the Antwerp episode, Japanese silver crossed the oceans aboard Portuguese vessels, connecting the archipelago with the rest of the world. However, behind the Portuguese presence was the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. The religious fervor in certain local sectors, driven by intense missionary activity, eventually triggered major social revolts. In response, the Edo shogunate began to feel deep unease, fearing that this spiritual influence could compromise the nation's stability and sovereignty. Ultimately, the shogunate decided to close its doors to Portugal. It was at this critical moment that the Dutch VOC seized its great opportunity. Acting with political cunning, they offered military support and artillery to help the shogunate suppress the uprisings led by converts, thereby winning the absolute trust of the authorities. The Dutch proposal was simple and forceful. Our priority is not faith, but trade. Faced with this purely pragmatic offer, the shogunate opened its doors. This was how the Netherlands, from the artificial island of Dejima in Nagasaki, became the only Western nation with a commercial monopoly in Japan. It was the exact moment when the Netherlands monopolized astronomical profits as Japan's only trading partner. In 1653, the ship Sperver, belonging to the VOC and bound for Nagasaki, was shipwrecked on Jeju Island, Korea, after being hit by a storm. Of the 64 crew members, only 36 survived. Among them was Hendrik Hamel, the accountant in charge of the company's books. The 13 years they spent in Korea were a time of immense suffering. However, from the cold logic of capitalism, the true tragedy did not begin in captivity, but after their escape. In 1666, after risking their lives to return to the VOC headquarters in Jakarta via Japan, what greeted Hamel's group was not a heroic welcome, but a frozen ledger. For the VOC shareholders, these men were already an item accounted for as a loss, along with the ship 13 years ago. That they returned alive might be a personal miracle, but for the company, it was nothing more than an incident of additional cost generation. The survivors appeared claiming 13 years of back pay, something the company was not inclined to celebrate. The famous Hamel's Journal, account of the shipwreck of Hamel, was, in fact, a kind of expense justification report, written with the sole purpose of claiming unpaid wages. Although this report was translated throughout Europe and became a bestseller, the concept of intellectual property did not exist at the time. The publishers grew rich, but Hamel, the owner of the information, received nothing. Depleted of resources, he had to set sail again into the harsh waters to survive. The relentless engine of capitalism, which strictly seeks profit, was already in motion even back then. And deep within that engine, in the basement of the Amsterdam City Hall, lay the giant fuel tank that kept it spinning, the Bank of Amsterdam. The new Amsterdam City Hall, completed in 1655, was the most colossal building in Europe at the time. People praised it as the eighth wonder of the world. The wealth of the entire world was absorbed into this imposing marble building, while the bank built unshakable trust, safeguarding 100% of all deposited gold and silver. It was thanks to this total trust that the VOC could dominate the seas, and Amsterdam succeeded in becoming the financial heart of Europe. The city enjoyed a prosperity unprecedented in history, and capitalism flourished here in all its splendor. However, it is precisely at this point that the 100% paradox begins, the one that would mark the fate of capitalism. Trust in the Bank of Amsterdam was born from its honesty, the fact that all physical assets were truly in the vault. It was the safest system, but paradoxically, it was also a great wall that prevented capital from replicating and expanding infinitely. For capitalism to leap to its next stage, it was necessary to go beyond protecting the money one has. It required the audacity to expand the economy by creating non-existent money under the name of credit. But Amsterdam, trapped in the perfection of the 100% figure, did not dare to cross that line. The moment that robust 100% wall became the shackle that slowed its growth, the hegemony of capitalism moved silently across the sea to Great Britain. The era of protecting capital reached its end, giving way to the era of creating capital. An event known to us as the Glorious Revolution was, in essence, a massive turning point that completely changed the course of capitalism. This was because William III, who had closely observed both the strict 100% principle of the Bank of Amsterdam with its limitations and the ruthless efficiency of the VOC, landed in England with his army, as you see on the screen, and ascended to the British throne. Although few notice it, the birth of the Bank of England in 1694 was the starting point that announced the evolution of capitalism, the transition from the era of protecting capital to the era of creating capital. How the engine of capitalism that began in Amsterdam gained explosive momentum in London, using that magic wand called fractional reserve banking, is something we will explore in detail in our next episode dedicated to London. Thank you for your attention.